Thank you. Item 12.0, Treasurer's Update.
First item on the treasurer's agenda tonight is the resolution from the Hamilton County Auditor accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the County Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the County Auditor. And as you could see in your agenda, that report is prepared by the county and sent to the Board of Education for their approval. It does have all of our tax rates listed out as well as the taxes generated by each levy. Moving on to the second item on the treasurer's agenda is the 5-year forecast item. And if we could, we do have a short PowerPoint with it. So the Ohio Department of Education requires school districts to submit a 5-year forecast which of the general operating fund of the district. The first submission of the school year is now due in November, with an update due at the end of May. And this tonight is the update to the original 5-year forecast. And it's important to note that the 5-year forecast only includes our district's general fund. One of the things that I want to talk about is to remind everyone that the 5-year forecast is a planning tool. It's somewhat like a picture or snapshot of what we're doing at one point in time, and it paints a picture of what could happen in the future based upon known trends and known things, and it also has to make certain assumptions and predictions of what may happen in the future. In other words, it's a living document that becomes outdated once any additional information has come to light. So as we know, as we go throughout the school year, we get new information about the state budget, we get new information. Employees come and go. They make a little bit, not everyone makes the same on the teacher salary schedule. So throughout the year, events happen that change what's in the forecast. So as such, the 5-year forecast is a good planning tool at best and will change periodically based as updated information becomes available. Again, it's a planning document, not a set-in-stone roadmap. When we prepared this forecast, we must make assumptions about future revenues and expenditures. Again, basing them on past trends and what knowledge we have at this point of future revenues and expenditures. Making those assumptions can be very challenging at times because there are factors and revenues and expenditures that we have no control over. So to give you, if we move on to the next slide, you can see some of the challenges that we have. When you look at the first two, we have no control over the state budget, and right now a new biennial budget is being discussed in Columbus, and we have no control over that. We can make our best guess based upon past trends. We can take a look at some of the simulations that are out right now, but we have no certainty right now of what our state revenues will be. At one point, I don't know if, and it's been since I've been at Forest Hills, our budget was cut mid-year. It was cut in March. So we were cut $1.6 million in March of that year. So the state budget, even once granted, can be adjusted in the middle of the budget. So again, that's a challenge to the forecast. And the first two you see up there, the state foundation payments and of course our property and TIF payments make up 90% of our budget. And of course, we don't have a lot of control over what the county auditor puts in his reappraisals and his updates as we go through that. So those two assumptions we have to look at. For example, to forecast new construction, we look at what the rate of increase has been in the past. So again, but just because it's an average rate of new construction in the past doesn't mean that it's going to be exactly that in the future. Some of the things we can partially control, and that's with the administrative team and of course the superintendent. It's all of us working together as a team. And personnel, what are the staffing levels? And that depends pretty much on the challenges that students bring to the district as to what staff we need. Also, we are now in the midst of negotiating our agreements. So while to forecast salaries and benefits, I look at past trends and forecast it forward. That doesn't mean that's what it's going to be in the future. And very soon, as we're working with our unions, we are going to have some certainty to come to what that is. And at that point, we can adjust the 5-year forecast and plan from there as we go forward. So those are a couple of the big things that are very challenging and some of the challenges that we look at. And, you know, the forecast is only as good as its assumptions. So we do our best, but sometimes changes come up. Moving on to the next slide, one of the things I always like to point out, and I know I said it when I first started talking, the 5-year forecast is only forecasting the general fund. It's only forecasting what is highlighted in green up there. It is not, none of the other funds are in there. Most of the other funds are special purpose funds, which means they have to be spent on certain things. Grants have grant conditions, and you have to follow them. Food service dollars can only be spent in the cafeteria. The PI levy, the new PI levy, can only be spent on capital assets. But just because these funds are not in the 5-year forecast doesn't mean that they don't influence it from time to time. And I highlighted the ESSER funds down there. We just have a short amount of ESSER funds left. However, we were able to use ESSER funds for continuity of services. So we were able to move the payment of some salaries and wages out of the general fund to the ESSER funds. Again, COVID was a big surprise and certainly not something that was in the original assumptions for a 5-year forecast before then. But anyhow, we are thankful for the COVID funds that we did get, and we were able to make good use of them. So we did move starting in fiscal year 21. If you look back at past forecasts, you're going to see that salaries and benefits decreased, and that's simply because it decreased in the forecast, but we used ESSER funds to pay for those. Now that we're running out of ESSER funds, we're going to have to move those salaries and wages back to the general fund, and that is in the forecast. But again, the forecast is only on the general fund. So moving on to the next slide. We see a much better forecast than I was able to bring to you in November. So as we look at this, we see the 3 past years and 5 years going forward. The 3 past years are actuals, what really happened. The blue bar is revenues. The red bar is expenditures, and the line is cash balance. So what you see is you see the revenues fairly static throughout the first 4 years, and then we move into our fiscal year 24 and 25, and you see the blue bar begin to go up, and that shows that is our levy funds coming in. The last 3 years of the forecast, again, the revenues are pretty flat. So why does levy revenues come in over 2 years? Because our fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30. Property taxes are levied and collected on a calendar year basis. So the new levy in our fiscal year, we'll have our fiscal year 24 coming up, we'll have a fall property tax settlement, and that will not include the new levy. And then we'll have a spring one, which will include a half year of the new levy. So you get out of the additional 8.3 million that the new levy raises, we'll get 4.1 in fiscal year 24, and then the next year we'll get the whole 8.3. So that's how it works, and then it continues at 8.3 annually through the life of the levy. So you see those blue bars jump up for 2 years. So obviously, moving on to the next slide, what makes this look so different? Well, of course, it was the May 2nd levy, and as I've already said, it was a combination levy, and what you will see in this forecast is only the 5.4 mills. That's what goes in the general fund. The 1.5 mills will go in the permanent improvement fund. And I know Mrs. Jonas sent an email earlier, and I think it's a good idea that now we are getting those levy funds in there, that perhaps we should present more detail in our financial report. And I think that's a good idea. So we'll start to add that. People are very interested, and rightly so, in what we are doing with those funds and how we're able to improve our buildings and maintain them. So good suggestion. We'll make sure that gets put in there. Again, the levy also included $750,000 in reductions. So moving on to the next slide, what are the main differences, since May is an update? What happened between May and November? How did the forecast change? Well, revenues actually went up by 1.6%. Which is good news, mainly due to we had a huge increase in our attorney negotiated Board of Revision settlements. So this year, all told, we took in $847,000 in attorney negotiated Board of Revision settlements. Now, where's this trend been? I only had trended 100,000 because if you look back at past years, some years we've gotten 12,000. The highest we've ever gotten in the last 5 years has been 200,000. So of course, I trended at what I thought was conservative at 100,000, but instead, we really did well, and it was mainly due to one case. There was one case that settled for $667,000. So it was mainly one case. These, we don't typically have a huge number of these, typically less than 10 per year. And unfortunately, I've had to take this revenue source out of the 5-year forecast because House Bill 126, which was passed last year, has negated and no longer allows us to settle outside Board of Revision. And not only that, we cannot challenge property values. It's gone up. Used to be we could challenge any property values, and here in this district, we looked at commercial properties, which had a sale that resulted in over a $50,000 increase in assessed value. The new law takes that to it has to be $500,000 in true value, so in market value, and 10% higher than what the auditor currently has it valued at. So that's literally gonna, we're not gonna see much revenue from Board of Revision, and we will not be allowed to settle outside of the actual Board of Revision at all. So that revenue stream has been taken out of the 5-year forecast. Again, the new funding model continues to be implemented, and we find out more about it as the months go along. And we've got higher increases in our transportation funds than we expected in November. So that was about $281,000. So those were the two main reasons for the revenue increases. Like I said, I did not, those were the two main reasons for the revenue increases in fiscal year 23. I did not trend forward the Board of Revision settlements. I did trend forward the remaining revenue increase is included in the new trends, which will rise them forward up a little bit. Also included, of course, was the new levy, which just passed. And again, I explained the first year gets a half a year. Fiscal years 25 through 27 gets the entire annual amount. So over the 5-year forecast, this had a positive $28.7 million when you add up all the years of new levy increases. So it was a $28.7 million positive impact on our cash balance due to the new levy throughout the life of the forecast. Looking at fiscal year '23, on the slide there, expenditures from November to May decreased by 1.7%. A lot of that is in a timing difference. We have a large amount of encumbrances still outstanding that may not be paid by the end of the year. Most notably, we have the buses that we ordered. There's almost 600,000 in buses that we PO that we were hoping to get delivered this year. John did come up with some good news last week. He told me he thinks we're going to have them by August, but that will put them in the next fiscal year. Again, Steve is having some supply chain issues as well still in technology. But with that, we also we give our departments budgets, and they don't spend them if they don't have to, and so that's returned to the general fund. So there were for some budget efficiencies which went into the savings and expenditures. So looking out through the next, the forecasted projected years, fiscal years 24 through 27, what are the changes from November? Well, the first one isn't a change. I just want to remind you that the inflationary increases, depending on which line it is, and you can look through the whole 22 pages of the notes and assumptions if you really want to, if you're having insomnia and really want to go to sleep, but it does discuss each line and the increases in each line. So they range from 2 to 4% throughout the current 5-year forecast. And the other thing, as we got the new levy, we had not yet identified any cuts to be put in the 5-year forecast. And as part of the levy scenario, we identified $750,000 in cuts annually that will stay out of the 5-year forecast for every year over the next 4 projected years. So that had a $3 million positive impact on cash balance. And also, part of the PI plan was to move some capital expenditures from the general fund to PI. I only put in $750,000 to move mainly in technology expenditures. Now, this is one of those things where the levy just passed, and forecast has to be filed by the end of March, so we had 2 weeks to put this in here. This is where I think that the facilities committee, the board, Larry and I, we all have some work to do, because I think there are a lot of scenarios we can look at there. One of the things we might want to look at is cash flowing, what we move from the general fund to the PI expenditures, because we know there are a lot of roofs that needs attention now. So to get more money to that in the beginning, but that's an example of how once we have some time to sit back and plan, get updated numbers, because inflation is marching on in terms of the costs that are in our preventive maintenance plan. But that's an example of where the 5-year forecast would change based upon priorities of the administration and the board. Certainly we could do some things there, but that is an assumption that's in there right now, but again, one that could change. So that is the update from May to November. Typically, I go over all the district statistics, but I think with the levy, everyone has heard them 15 times a week, so I skipped that for tonight. But I do think that Forest Hills remains a strong school district who has below average cost and above average performance, and I've listed several things there on the screen to show that we're certainly a good return on investment, a good bang for our residents' dollar. So that said, are there any questions before I move on to the monthly report?
Go ahead.
Board member, you want to take the floor? Go ahead,
Sure.
Sarah.
Where do we find the $750,000 in reductions on the new 5-year forecast?
If you look in the capital outlay item,
Okay, it's in capital outlay?
yeah.
Okay. And did we, on page 16, it looks like the ADM for fiscal year 22 was left off? Was that just a
Which
mistake?
page?
16. that graph at the bottom? Should we have?
Oh, this is a model in terms of software. So I think what this is just showing what the past has been. It's not showing the projected forward. But I think if you look, if I find the page, sorry, if you look at page 8, you will find the district educated enrollment moving forward, and those are the same numbers that were in the November report.
Okay. And just to clarify a little bit, because I know this has been a question, it's something that you and I have discussed. Just from that graph on page 8, it does show enrollment is declining. I know that was, some questions that people have had, over the last couple of months. And I guess if you look at it over a 10-year period, it might not appear that way, but over a 20-year period, starting from 2002 to current, it definitely shows us losing about 500 students. And why I think that's significant to note is, when was it, 1999, that Nagel, they began at Nagel?
You're predating me a little bit then, sorry.
But I guess that's a thing, because I know that's been a topic a lot of people have been talking about, and you and I had discussed that, and I believe it was the EMIS report you had sent with that information, and you noted that that was the most accurate student enrollment capture that we have. Okay. But that is a true thing. Over the 20-year period, we definitely have had student enrollment declined.
We have had student enrollment decline. There, like you and I have discussed, there's a lot of other factors that go into that. And if you go back, and I know, again, I wasn't treasurer here, but my own sons at times when the enrollment was really high, the entire 5th grade at Wilson, my son was at Wilson during those years, there were, the entire 5th grade was in the parking lot and modulars. So we would need to, and I think we need to do this too, good exercise I've already talked to John about. I think we need to look at the footprint of our buildings and see what the rooms are and what those rooms are being used for, to see if there's any efficiencies to be gained there. But I think too, and Betsy could talk more to this, with the special education, there's been more mandates from them, so a little bit more call for rooms and places for people to meet. So, but it certainly deserves study for efficiencies. Yeah, you and I have talked about that. Also important to note that when you look at the numbers that are in on page 8 here, that is the district educated enrollment. It does not include preschool fund, and the enrollment on that page shows what the state uses on a per pupil basis to calculate our funding. State doesn't use, the preschool numbers are not in there. We do get preschool funds, but not by a per pupil enrollment on this particular page.
And so enrollment, therefore, is an important factor when it comes to state
funding. Absolutely. It is, and you know what, again, that would be a whole 4-hour thing, because unfortunately, the state runs through a formula to determine funding, and then they said, oh, this district, if we use this new formula, they got more last year. So we're basically on the guarantee to get the same amount we got the year before.
Okay.
So they don't really use the formula for us, but that's one of the reasons we need to keep our eye on what the formula ends up being. Unfortunately, it doesn't usually help wealthier districts or higher income districts.
Are they still messing around with that formula, or is it finalized now?
They're still messing around with the budget. So, I think the ODE has almost everything implemented in terms of which count they're going to use when and so on and so forth. But again, we'll probably know June 30 as to how much we're going to get.
Okay.
Alana, to the point of enrollment is down, and I know that was a concern that people had. but to equate that to, why are we spending this much, doesn't account for things like inflation. It doesn't account for the difference in cost
Well-
of benefits, salaries as people progress in their career and that sort of thing, correct?
Yeah, one of the things that I do like to point to, and that's a good point, I like to look at the cost per pupil. Our cost per pupil remains low, and cost per pupil is actually total cost minus some capital and debt costs, but total operational costs divided by enrollment. So using the enrollment number, it is relative then that enrollment is a factor in that cost per pupil. So I think that shows our cost per pupil being low. That shows that maybe we have adjusted with that enrollment. But I think we do need to look at our spaces.
And again, just being able to understand all this a little bit better. I know we had talked about doing like a big finance meeting, maybe like a retreat. I think that would be a really good idea. I think it would help the community better understand as well as the board. So I would definitely be in favor of something like that.
Okay, great. Oh, I would be too. Yeah, yeah, you do like to talk numbers with me, and I appreciate that. Any other questions?
I just have a couple of questions here as I'm flipping through the document that you were talking about on page, so this page with the missing graph here, you did say it was missing the total ADM number, right? And so I could find that on page 8.
Yes.
The page 8 shows.
Page 8 shows all the district educated enrollment.
So that's the green bar though, correct, or no?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last.
So is the district educated enrollment number at 6797
Yes.
on page 8, is the 6797 the green bar?
On what page was that on? Sorry.
Page 16, page 16.
Basically, it'll show both of the graphs being exactly the same number. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that's correct.
So I'm looking for the
Total ADM.
the total
Well, I think
ADM.
the model has left off ADM because the reason ADM was on here is in past years, they use ADM to
Sure,
calculate funding. I can get you those numbers,
Just-
though.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that for everybody out there
Okay.
watching. It's not the same number.
What number is that on the cup report?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's
It probably comes from the
That's
CUP
what it
report,
says on the
right?
cup report too. 6796.75.
Total ADM.
Total
Versus
district
district
educated
educated
enrollment.
So there's two separate numbers that need to be updated on that graph, right, on page 16.
I mean, I can add if you want it, but the reason it's left off in 22 is going forward, it's just going to be district educated enrollment. So this is a model that comes from a company, so it's not something that was left off. It's something that they did purposely. But certainly, if you'd like to see that ADM number on there, I can pull it and add it to the
Well, yep, for all the numbers people out there, it might be nice to
Okay.
have that on there.
Okay,
so
I'll make a
thanks.
note of that.
We just don't know what that number is right now, right?
I don't have it in my head, but I can certainly find it and email it later. Any other questions?
Just another comment regarding the PI fund, when you were talking about the money being moved over to the PI fund. You said 750 is moved over? Is that correct?
775.
Or 775?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so is this after levy or before levy?
It starts in fiscal year '24.
Okay, so 24. So based on this plan that Larry had worked on with John, with the maintenance plan that everybody knows about that's out there, we have probably 800,000 worth of replacements, roof replacement, roof repairs, roof buses, pavement. So I just want to just to clarify that these items were the items that we were talking about through the levy scenario that were going to be paid out of the permanent improvement fund. And so just to reiterate that, you know, we had planned for 800,000 right off the bat. And this list constitutes a $12 million. Right.
Yes, and we will be able to make that.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
hmm Hopefully, we'll be able to do a little bit more.
Just to clarify that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.